What happens when a decorated police officer looks Judge Frank Caprio in the eye and says, "You don't understand the law"? Drop a comment telling us what you think should happen when a badge challenges a bench in open court. Because before this day was over, a courtroom would go silent, a grandmother would shake with tears, a sick child's name would change everything, and one officer's career would never recover. Hit that subscribe button if you believe no badge is above the law. Like this video if you think real justice starts the moment power gets questioned. Share this with someone who needs to see what happens when arrogance walks into the wrong room. Because the first sentence Officer Daniel Mercer spoke that morning sounded confident, but the last one nearly broke him. The rain started before sunrise over downtown Providence on November 14, 2025. By 9:12 a.m., the marble steps outside the Providence Municipal Court were slick and dark, and people filed into the old building carrying umbrellas, coffee cups, folders, and ordinary worries. Inside Courtroom 2B, the fluorescent lights hummed over polished wood benches scarred by decades of elbows, whispers, and decisions nobody forgot. The clerk, Joanne Pellegrino, adjusted her reading glasses. Bailiff Louis Morneau folded his hands behind his back, and Judge Frank Caprio, calm as a still harbor, settled into his chair with the same quiet presence that had disarmed thousands before him. Then Officer Daniel Mercer walked in. He was 38 years old, 6'1", shoulders square, jaw tight, with the kind of posture that announced authority before he ever opened his mouth. His Navy Providence police uniform looked freshly pressed. His black Thorogood boots were mirror bright. Badge 4172 sat high on his chest. His hair was clipped close in a high-end tight cut, and a pair of Oakley sunglasses rested on top of his head like he had only stepped in for a minute and expected this whole thing to be simple. It was not simple. At the defendant's table sat Alina Rios, 67, a widow from Federal Hill with thin wrists, silver hair pinned back with a plastic clip, and a faded olive cardigan from Kohl's buttoned wrong at the middle because her hands had been trembling since breakfast. Next to her was a large manila envelope stuffed with papers, pharmacy receipts, tow invoices, hospital forms, and one handwritten note folded so many times the edges had gone soft. She had driven a gray 2012 Honda Civic for 13 years. On September 18, 2025, Officer Mercer had stopped her on Broad Street and ticketed her for operating with a suspended registration and failure to obey a stop sign. He had ordered her car towed from the curb. The fines were ugly. The consequences were worse. Judge Caprio read the case number aloud. TR 2511847, City of Providence versus Alina Rios. He looked down at the papers, then up at her. "Good morning, ma'am." Alina tried to smile and failed. "Good morning, Your Honor." Caprio glanced at Mercer. "Officer." Mercer gave a clipped nod. "Your Honor." The judge scanned the file another time. "Mrs. Rios, I see a stop sign violation, a suspended registration and impoundment. I also see a request for consideration based on medical hardship. Tell me what happened." Alina swallowed, pressed the envelope flat with both palms, and began in a voice so soft people in the back leaned forward to hear. "I was coming from Rhode Island Hospital. My grandson Mateo had been discharged that afternoon after an asthma attack. I had his prescriptions. I had his nebulizer tubing. I was trying to get home before the weather turned." Mercer shifted his weight. Alina continued. "I slowed at the stop sign on Broad and Dean, but I was nervous. I know I was. I didn't mean to do anything wrong. When the officer told me my registration was suspended, I said there had to be some mistake. My husband handled the insurance before he died. I've been trying to straighten it out." The room softened around that sentence. Caprio did not interrupt her. He never rushed pain when it was telling the truth. Then Mercer did. "With respect, Your Honor, the statute is very clear." His voice was firm, flat, carrying the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. "Operating a vehicle with a suspended registration is not discretionary on the roadside. The vehicle is subject to tow. The driver was informed. The temperature in the room changed. Caprio turned his head slowly. Officer Mercer, I'm going to hear her first. Mercer gave a tight nod. Yes, sir, but I want the record clear that the law does not contain an exception for sympathy. A few people in the gallery exchanged looks. Joanne stopped writing for half a beat. Even the old radiator under the windows seemed to hiss louder. Like this video if you already feel where this is going. Drop a comment telling us whether that sentence sounded like discipline or ego, because everyone in that room had the same thought at the same time. And none of them said it out loud. Caprio folded his hands. The law is not allergic to context, officer. Mercer met his eyes, and context doesn't erase the violation. Elena stared at the table, her lower lip shook. Caprio looked back to her. Mrs. Rios, what happened after the stop? She opened the envelope and took out a paper with shaking fingers. I told him my grandson needed the breathing machine in the trunk. I asked if I could just drive the 2 miles home or call my daughter to get the bag. He said no. He called a tow truck. I kept telling him Mateo couldn't go through the night without it. Mercer exhaled through his nose. That is not accurate. Elena flinched like the words had struck her. Caprio looked at Mercer again. You'll have your turn. The judge then asked the question that seemed small in the moment and enormous a minute later. Officer, was your body camera active during the stop? Mercer answered too quickly. Battery failure at approximately 19:41 hours. Caprio glanced at the report. The stop began at 19:43. Yes, sir. The unit had intermittent issues that week. Joanne's eyes moved to the report, then back to Mercer. She was too professional to react, but the tiny pause was there. Caprio tapped the paper once. Interesting. Mercer straightened. There's also dash footage from the cruiser, Your Honor, but it doesn't materially alter the citation. That sentence hung in the courtroom like a wire beginning to spark. Caprio leaned back. If there's footage, then we'll review footage. Mercer's jaw flexed. Respectfully, sir, this is a straightforward traffic matter. I'm not sure a video review is necessary when the violation is uncontested. That was the moment. The one people would replay later. The one clipped and captioned and shared with faces wide open in disbelief. Because Caprio did not raise his voice. He didn't slam the gavel. He didn't need to. He looked at Mercer with the steady patience of a man who had seen bluster before and survived enough of life to recognize the difference between confidence and insecurity. Officer Mercer, he said quietly, the courtroom decides what is necessary. Silence. Mercer made the mistake that would follow him for months. He spoke again anyway. With respect, Your Honor, if judges keep tossing valid stops because a story sounds sad, you train citizens not to obey the law. Gasps rippled across the gallery. Not loud, not theatrical, just real. The kind of sound people make when someone has stepped too far and everybody knows it at once. Luis Morno shifted one foot. Joanne looked down at her keyboard and kept her face neutral. Elena covered her mouth. And Judge Caprio, still calm, said the line people would quote all over Providence by lunchtime. You can enforce the law without humiliating the people it binds. Mercer didn't blink. Humiliation wasn't part of the stop. Caprio nodded once. Then we'll let the evidence speak. Share this with someone who says a courtroom can't feel like a thunderstorm. Hit subscribe if you believe one sentence can expose an entire character. Because when Judge Caprio ordered the footage loaded, Officer Mercer still thought this was about a ticket. It was, not anymore. While the clerk requested the digital file, the camera of every person in that room seemed to shift inward, even if there were no television crews yet. Courtroom 2B had its own weather now. Elena dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue from her cardigan sleeve. Mercer stared at the wall clock above the exit door. 9:28 a.m., the second hand clicked louder than it should have. If you had known Daniel Mercer 5 years earlier, you might have described him differently. In 2020, he had been the kind of officer supervisors like to point at during morning briefings. He joined Providence PD at 23 after 2 years working nights at a warehouse in Johnston and taking criminal justice classes at the Community College of Rhode Island. His father, Leonard Mercer, had been a diesel mechanic with forearms like steel cables and a stubborn code about work. Show up early, leave late, complain to the driveway, not the world. His mother, Denise, worked triage at Miriam Hospital and taught her son that the first person who speaks in a crisis controls the room. Daniel learned both lessons too well. He was sharp in the academy, good runner, excellent shooter, top third in legal procedure. He also had a talent for command presence, the academy phrase for making people move because you looked like you expected them to. In 2017, he pulled a 6-year-old boy from a smoke-filled apartment over a laundromat on Cranston Street and got a departmental commendation with his name in the Providence Journal. For a while, he believed he was becoming the version of himself he'd always wanted to respect. Then life got messy in the way the academy never trains for. His partner, Luis Ortega, took a medical retirement after a shooting left metal in his shoulder and palm. Nick behind his eyes. Daniel's marriage to Alicia Mercer cracked under overtime anger and the kind of silence that grows mold in a house. Their daughter, Zoe, was 8 when Alicia moved to Warwick and took the yellow Le Creuset casserole dish they'd gotten as a wedding gift, leaving Daniel in a 2-bedroom apartment on Admiral Street with empty walls and a dining table he never used. Around the same time, a new precinct captain began pushing numbers hard: stops, citations, visibility, control. The language of service narrowed into the language of compliance. Daniel adapted because that's what he'd always done, but something in him hardened into a shape that could no longer bend. He began to believe kindness invited risk. That hesitation got officers hurt. That every excuse was manipulation waiting for weakness. He started speaking in code sections even when nobody asked. He kept a notebook of citations like a hitter tracking pitches. His fellow officers noticed he no longer laughed the way he used to. One rookie said Mercer could recite municipal tow policy faster than he could say good morning. That rookie wasn't joking. By September 2025, Mercer drove a black 2021 Dodge Charger Scat Pack on his days off and polished his service belt at the kitchen counter while sports radio filled the apartment. He had a knockoff Breitling watch he wore because it looked expensive from far away. He ironed his uniforms crisp enough to cut paper. He told himself standards mattered because standards were all that kept chaos out. What he never asked was what happened when standards became an excuse not to see people at all. At 9:36 a.m., Joanne looked up from the court terminal. "Your Honor, the body camera file exists." The room froze. Mercer turned his head too fast. "That can't be correct." Joanne adjusted her glasses. BWC file uploaded at 21:18 hours on September 18. Device 3B117, tagged non-evidentiary. Caprio's expression didn't change, and available for playback. "Yes, Your Honor." Mercer stepped forward half a pace. "The audio may be incomplete." Caprio looked at him. "That will also let the evidence speak." Elena closed her eyes. "Before that video starts, drop a comment telling us whether you think the officer forgot about the file or hoped nobody would find it. Because what played next didn't just contradict a report. It opened a door no one in that courtroom was ready for. The first frame appeared on the courtroom monitor with that familiar fisheye wobble of body cam footage. Rain beads shivered under streetlights. A windshield reflected neon from Santos Pharmacy on Broad Street. Time stamp, 1944-08. Audio crackled. Then Mercer's voice, sharper and younger in the tinny speaker than it sounded live in court. "License and registration." Elena's hands came into frame, trembling, passing the documents upward. "Officer, I'm sorry, my grandson is sick. I'm trying to." Ma'am, just answer what I ask. The whole room could hear the way she swallowed the rest of the sentence. On the screen, Mercer walked back toward his cruiser. Another officer stood near the rear bumper, younger, broader face, rookie posture. Noah Pike, 24 years old, academy haircut, freshly minted caution. At the time of the stop, he had been Mercer's ride-along trainee. In the courtroom now, he was not present, not yet, but his absence started feeling important. The footage continued. Mercer ran the plate. Dispatch came over the radio, flat and quick. Unit 4172, registration showing suspended pending insurance discrepancy. Advise. Mercer answered, copy. Then the video jumped 6 minutes forward. Elena stood by the curb in the rain, cardigan darkening at the shoulders. Her voice was clearer now, strained but respectful. Please, officer, the machine is in the trunk. He was at the hospital today. I can show you the papers. Mercer's face never appeared, only his chest and arms as the camera moved, but his tone cut through the room. You should have handled your paperwork before driving. My husband died in March. I'm trying. I'm sorry for your loss. That doesn't change the status. The line sounded professional at first, then came the next one. You don't get a pass because you tell the saddest story first. A woman in the back whispered, "Oh my God." Elena in the courtroom lowered her head into her hands. Mercer stared at the screen like a man watching a stranger wear his face. Caprio did not look at him. He let the video keep going. On screen, Elena pointed to the car. Please let me get the bag. Mercer replied, once the tow is initiated, you don't enter the vehicle. It's for my grandson. Then maybe next time obey the law before you play grandmother of the year. This time the gasp was loud. Joanne stopped typing entirely. Luis Moreno looked toward the gallery because 3 people had spoken at once. A young man in the second row muttered, "No way." Another woman put her hand over her mouth. Courtroom 2B had gone from tense to electric in under 30 seconds. Mercer tried to interrupt. Your Honor, that comment was. Caprio lifted one finger. That was all it took. The body cam continued. Noah Pike's voice entered from the edge of the frame, hesitant. Sergeant, sorry, officer. She said there's medical equipment in the trunk. Mercer snapped back. Then document that she was advised and refused compliance. Noah said she didn't refuse, though. Mercer answered, lower now, colder. Write the scene. Don't editorialize it. The timestamp rolled to 1957-42. Dispatch again. Unit 4172, stand by. DMV batch may have error. Possible insurance reinstatement at 18:03. We're confirming. Mercer said nothing. Noah spoke softly. Did you hear that? Mercer replied, tow's already en route. The video ended at 20:01:11 with Elena crying quietly in the rain while red tow lights washed across the wet pavement like a warning. No one had taken seriously enough. The room did not move for 3 full seconds. Then Caprio spoke. Officer Mercer, you stated in your report that Mrs. Rios became hostile. Mercer cleared his throat. Her tone escalated. Caprio's eyes narrowed just enough to register disappointment. I heard distress. I did not hear hostility. Mercer shifted. I made an on-scene assessment. Caprio looked at the screen, then back at him. And I just watched you mock a grieving woman asking for asthma equipment. Mercer opened his mouth, then shut it. Caprio turned to Joanne. I want dispatch logs for the stop, full tow timing, and any update on the registration status from 1940 to 2015. Yes, Your Honor. Mercer's face lost a little color. Comment right now. Was that just bad attitude, or did the officer's words cross into abuse of authority? Because Judge Caprio had seen enough to question the ticket. But the next records would decide whether this was rudeness, negligence, or something far worse. The hearing recessed until 1:30 p.m. for records collection, but nobody left with the feeling that the story had paused. It had only spread. In the hallway outside Courtroom 2B, the old tile floor clicked under hurried shoes. Elena sat on a wooden bench beneath a bulletin board covered in parking notices and legal aid flyers. Her daughter Marisol arrived at 10:11 a.m., still in blue scrubs under a fleece jacket, hair pulled back, eyes red from a shift she clearly hadn't slept after. Marisol worked as a respiratory therapist at Hasbro Children's Hospital. The moment she saw her mother, she knelt and wrapped both arms around her. "Ma, you shouldn't have had to do this alone." Elena shook her head. "I thought it was just a fine." From the opposite end of the corridor, Mercer stood near a water fountain speaking in a low, clipped voice into his phone. "I'm telling you, it's being blown out of proportion," he said. "The judge is making a show of it." He listened, jaw working. "No, I didn't lie, I summarized." Another pause. "Then get Benson down here." Benson was Sergeant Malik Benson, 46, a union-savvy supervisor with salt at his temples and the exhausted eyes of a man who had spent 2 decades cleaning up after younger men mistook stubbornness for principle. He arrived 20 minutes later in a charcoal suit and a weather-darkened trench coat. He didn't greet Mercer with a handshake. He looked at him once and asked, "Did you hear dispatch say the registration might have cleared?" Mercer answered, "Might have." Benson leaned in. "That is not the answer you want to carry into a reopened record." Mercer's nostrils flared. "I made the call based on what I had." "No," Benson's voice stayed low. "Based on the footage, you made the call before you finished getting what you had." Mercer looked away. Meanwhile, in the clerk's office, Joanne Pellegrino printed the tow sequence. She had worked in municipal court for 22 years and could tell when a routine matter was about to become the kind of thing people discussed at dinner tables. She saw Caprio reading silently by the window, rain sliding down the glass in thin silver lines. When she handed him the dispatch summary, he scanned one line and let out the smallest breath. "Joanne," he said, "please make 3 extra copies." She did not ask why. She had already seen enough to know. If you believe details matter, hit subscribe now, because the next document changed this from one ugly stop to a potential career-ending deception. And once that paper landed on the bench, even the officer's supporters stopped looking comfortable. By 1:27 p.m., Courtroom 2B was standing room only. A local reporter from WPRI, Tasha Green, had taken a seat in the back row with a legal pad and the hungry stillness of someone who knew a quote was coming. 2 off-duty officers slipped in by the side wall, arms folded, saying nothing. A law student from Roger Williams University typed notes into her phone. A retired school principal who had only come to fight a red light citation stayed because she had texted her sister. "You won't believe what's happening in here." When Mercer returned, the sharpness in his step was gone. Not humility, not yet, just the first signs of instability. He had removed the sunglasses from his head. His collar looked too tight. For the first time all day, he seemed aware of being watched. Caprio reopened the hearing. "Mrs. Rios, Officer Mercer, thank you for your patience." He lifted the dispatch log. "We now have supplemental records." He read slowly, deliberately. At 1957, 39 dispatch advised Unit 4172 of a possible DMV batch error affecting insurance status. At 1958, 13 dispatch noted provisional confirmation that reinstatement had been processed at 18:03. At 20:04, 21 final confirmation, registration clear, no suspension. A murmur moved across the room like wind through dry leaves. Caprio looked over the top of the paper. "Officer Mercer, when was the tow ordered?" Joanne answered from her monitor. "Tow initiated at 1955. Vehicle hooked at 20:03. Departed scene at 20:07. Caprio nodded. "So the final dispatch clearance occurred before the vehicle left." Mercer's lips parted. "Final clearance, yes, but on-scene officers rely on confirmed status in real time. There can be lag. Caprio asked, and when you received the possible error notice at 1957, did you consider pausing the tow? Mercer replied, once a tow is in motion, roadside procedure prioritizes safety and scene control. Lena Hart rose from the solicitor's table for the first time. She was 39, razor-precise, hair tied in a low bun, wearing a navy blazer over a cream blouse and the expression of someone who had waited all morning for the right sentence to challenge. Your Honor, may I inquire? Caprio nodded. Proceed. She stepped toward Mercer. Officer, did dispatch order you to continue the tow? No. Did dispatch tell you the suspension was final? No. Did the defendant threaten you? No. Did she attempt to flee? No. Did she resist? No. Hart let each answer hang half a second longer than comfort allowed. Then, what exactly required you to keep a medical bag locked in a trunk once you knew the registration might be clear? Mercer's eyes hardened. The driver had already established cause for impoundment. Hart's voice stayed level. That is not what I asked. Mercer swallowed. I acted within policy. Hart turned to the bench. Policy is not magic language, Your Honor. It doesn't dissolve judgment. Caprio's gaze never left Mercer. No, it does not. Then Hart produced a second document. We also have the post-incident report filed by Officer Mercer at 21:03 hours. She lifted it. It states, quote, driver became argumentative and refused verbal instruction to remain calm. The footage does not show that. Mercer answered, reports are summaries, not transcripts. Caprio's response came like a soft hammer. Summaries are not licenses to invent. A man in the back row whispered, that's the line. But there was more. Hart called the first witness of the afternoon, Dennis Falco. A stocky tow yard manager in a yellow safety jacket stepped to the stand. He smelled faintly of diesel and rain. Falco owned Atlantic Recovery, the company that had hauled Elena's Honda that night. He looked deeply uncomfortable being in court, which made him believable before he said a word. Hart asked, Mr. Falco, do you remember the September 18 stop on Broad Street? Yeah. Did Officer Mercer communicate anything to you before the vehicle was hooked? Falco rubbed his nose. He said make it quick, said the lady was gonna keep crying and drag it out. Elena shut her eyes. Hart continued, did he say anything else? Falco hesitated. He told me, I don't care what story she's selling, get it on the truck before she thinks tears change the law. This time Mercer spoke before anyone asked him to. That is not an exact quote. Falco looked at him, then at the judge. Close enough that I remember it 2 months later. The room went dead quiet again. Like this video, if you just felt the whole case tilt. Because the next witness was not on anyone's morning bingo card, and what she brought into that courtroom gave the story a heartbeat no one could ignore. Her name was Rachel Kim, 32 years old, emergency department nurse, charcoal wool coat over dark green scrubs, rain still on her shoulders. She had not planned to testify until she heard from Marisol in the hallway that the court was reviewing the stop. On September 18, Rachel had finished a shift at Rhode Island Hospital and stopped at Santos Pharmacy across from where the traffic stop unfolded. She stood at the witness stand, holding a paper coffee cup like she needed something steady in her hands. Hart asked, Ms. Kim, why are you here? Rachel looked toward Elena first, because I saw her that night and because I saw what happened later. She explained that while waiting in the pharmacy line, she had looked through the front window and noticed an older woman crying beside a gray Honda while a tow truck backed in. The image stuck with her because the woman kept pointing to the trunk and saying something she couldn't fully hear. Then, around 10:20 that same night, Rachel saw Alina again at the hospital, frantic, without the medication bag she had expected to have. Hart asked, "How do you know it was the same woman?" Rachel answered, "Same cardigan, same silver hair clip, same panic." What was happening at the hospital? Rachel took a breath. Her grandson, Mateo Rios, age 11, came in respiratory distress. The words changed the air. Alina's shoulders started shaking before the nurse even finished. Marisol put an arm around her. Hart continued gently, "Can you describe his condition?" Rachel's voice softened. Wheezing, chest retractions, low oxygen saturation. He was scared, kept asking where his abuela was and why he couldn't catch his breath. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft tapping of Joanne's keys. Hart asked, "Did Mrs. Rios mention her car had been towed?" Rachel nodded. She said the police wouldn't let her retrieve the machine parts from the trunk. Mercer looked down for the first time all day. Caprio asked one question himself. "Ms. Kim, in your medical opinion, did the delay matter?" Rachel chose her words carefully. "I can't say a single delay caused the episode. Asthma is complex. But when a child with severe asthma is missing medication and equipment after discharge, yes, every delay matters." There it was, not melodrama, not speculation, just enough truth to punch a hole straight through every procedural excuse Mercer had stacked in front of himself. The gallery knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Even Mercer knew it, though he still wasn't ready to admit it. Before we go further, drop a comment telling us if that nurse's testimony changed the way you see this case. Subscribe if you believe the most devastating evidence is often the calmest, because Mercer still had one defense left, and he was about to use it in a way that made everything worse. He asked to speak. Caprio allowed it. Mercer turned slightly toward the bench, but not toward Alina. "With sympathy to the family, there is no evidence my enforcement action caused the medical event." The words landed with all the warmth of sheet metal. Marisol stood halfway up from her seat. "Oh my God." Luis Morno motioned for calm. Mercer continued, digging the hole deeper with every syllable. "Officers cannot substitute emotion for procedure. If we start making roadside exceptions based on unverifiable claims, we create inconsistent enforcement and safety risks." Caprio stared at him. "Unverifiable?" Mercer answered, "On scene, yes." Caprio lifted the hospital discharge papers from Alina's file. The child's discharge paperwork was in the vehicle. The pharmacy receipt was time-stamped 1931. The inhalation supplies were listed. Your body camera shows Mrs. Rios offering to show you the bag. He paused. What exactly was unverifiable? Mercer had no good answer. He reached for the last refuge of men in trouble, abstraction. My duty was to the law. Caprio's reply came so evenly it almost whispered. No, officer, your duty was to the lawful use of discretion. Then he ordered something no one had expected in a traffic court hearing. I want Internal Affairs notified that the accuracy of the officer's report is now at issue. I also want Officer Noah Pike made available. That sentence rippled through the room harder than any raised voice could have. Because Noah Pike was the rookie from the video. And if the court was calling him, that meant this had moved beyond whether Alina owed a fine. This was about what really happened on Broad Street, what Mercer told the rookie, and whether his report had crossed from omission into dishonesty. Mercer turned toward Sergeant Benson. Benson did not look back. The hearing recessed again until 3:15 p.m. Outside in the corridor, the courthouse buzzed like a substation. Tasha Green was already on the phone to her producer. The retired school principal from the morning told a stranger, you could hear the whole room stop breathing. A young public defender murmured, this clip will go everywhere. And for once, that did not sound like exaggeration. Mercer stood alone near a vending machine, hands on hips, staring at a spiral of peanut butter crackers like it had personally betrayed him. His phone vibrated. Alicia. He answered on the second buzz. What? Her voice was tired, low. Zoe saw your face on someone's live stream. He closed his eyes. There's no live stream. Someone recorded outside court, Daniel. She heard enough. He rubbed his forehead. I don't need this right now. No, Alicia said. You probably need the exact opposite. A beat. She asked me why her dad sounded mean to an old lady. That hit him harder than the judge had. He leaned against the wall. You don't know what it was like on scene. Alicia answered, maybe, but I know what your voice sounds like when you stop seeing people. The line went dead. Mercer kept the phone in his hand for several seconds after the call ended. His breathing changed, just slightly, enough to signal the first crack, not repentance, not yet, but impact. Back in the clerk's office, Caprio sat with the supplemental file. He had presided over countless cases where people arrived ashamed, angry, or defensive. He believed deeply in mercy, but he also knew something dangerous was revealed when a person given public authority could not tell the difference between firmness and contempt. He had not decided what lesson this day would end with. He only knew the truth wasn't finished speaking. If you've ever seen someone double down when honesty would have saved them, comment right now. Because Noah Pike was on his way to court, and what he carried with him was heavier than any citation book. Noah arrived at 3:09 p.m. in a suit from Men's Warehouse that still had the stiff shoulders of a first formal purchase. He had changed out of uniform after being instructed by Internal Affairs to appear as a witness. His palms were so damp he wiped them on his slacks twice before stepping through the courtroom doors. He was young enough that acne marks still showed across his jaw under the courtroom lights. He looked at Mercer once, then looked away fast. Lieutenant Owen Sutter from Internal Affairs took a seat near the rail. 52, gray tie, expression like closed steel. He carried a black binder and never opened it. That alone was enough to make people whisper. Caprio reconvened. Officer Noah Pike, Joanne read, please raise your right hand. Noah was sworn in. Hart approached carefully, not wanting to spook him into memorized caution. Officer Pike, on September 18, 2025, were you present during the stop involving Elena Rios? Yes. What was your role? Field training, right along under Officer Mercer. Did you observe the defendant behave aggressively? Noah swallowed, no. Did she refuse verbal instructions? No. Did she appear upset? Yes. Did she mention a sick child? Yes. Hart let the answer settle before the next one. Did dispatch indicate a possible error in the registration status? Noah nodded, yes. Did Officer Mercer hear that transmission? A long pause. Mercer stared at him. Caprio said gently, answer the question. Noah did, yes. The room tightened. Hart asked, what happened after the transmission? Noah clasped his hands so hard his knuckles went white. I asked if we should hold the tow. Officer Mercer said once a lesson starts, you don't interrupt it. The back row erupted in whispers. Mercer's face went pale, then red. Hart asked, did he use those exact words? Noah nodded once, yes. Hart took a breath. Did he give you instructions about how to write the scene? Noah stared at the witness stand wood grain. He said, write the law the way it keeps people scared. Fear gets compliance. Courtroom 2B exploded. Not physically, not chaotically, but emotionally completely. Audible disbelief, a woman saying no, someone else saying that's insane, Lewis calling for order, Joanne frozen mid-keystroke, Elena crying without making a sound. Even Sergeant Benson shut his eyes. Mercer shot to his feet. That is absolutely not what I said. Noah looked up at him then, and the fear in his face turned into something else. Hurt. You did say it. Hart stepped back. She didn't need another question. The damage was already done. Caprio looked at Mercer. Sit down. Mercer remained standing a beat too long, then sat. The judge turned back to Noah. Did you reflect those concerns anywhere? Noah nodded. I sent a training memo draft to Sergeant Benson the next morning. I never filed it because Officer Mercer told me not to create confusion over a routine tow. Benson shifted in his seat, but did not deny it. Hart asked, do you still have that draft? Noah looked at Sutter. Internal Affairs took my phone this afternoon. Sutter finally opened the binder. Confirmed. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. One draft memo. One line preserved. One more piece fitting where Mercer desperately needed blank space. Share this with someone who still thinks body cams and rookies never matter. Like this video if you just realized this wasn't a bad moment, it was a pattern. Because Lieutenant Sutter hadn't even started talking yet, and he was carrying the kind of paperwork that turns a courtroom lesson into a professional funeral. Caprio invited Sutter forward. Lieutenant, he said, I understand your review today is preliminary. It is. State only what is appropriate for the record. Sutter nodded. He was precise the way experienced investigators are precise, never wasting a word when one clean sentence would do more damage. After the morning hearing, Internal Affairs conducted an immediate audit of Officer Mercer's incident narrative and digital evidence tags from the September 18 stop. Caprio waited. Sutter continued. The body camera file existed but was marked non-evidentiary. The narrative omitted the dispatch correction, characterized the defendant as hostile, and did not note the presence of claimed medical equipment. Mercer spoke through his teeth, claimed. Sutter did not turn. The word claimed is not the issue. He then added the sentence that made even Tasha Green lower her pen for a second. We also identified 6 prior stops over the last 11 months in which Officer Mercer used materially identical language describing citizens as hostile or argumentative, with no corresponding behavior reflected in available audio. The sound in the courtroom vanished. It wasn't just quiet. It was that deeper thing beneath quiet when everyone understands they are no longer watching a single mistake. They are watching the outline of a habit. Caprio asked, are you asserting a pattern of false reporting? Sutter answered carefully, I am asserting sufficient concern to trigger a formal integrity review. Mercer looked like someone had kicked the floor out from under him, but pride kept him vertical. You're hanging an entire career on wording. Sutter turned then finally, no officer on choices. That line hit almost as hard as the judge's. Caprio asked Mercer if he wished to respond. He did, and in doing so, nearly burned the last bridge left to him. He rose slowly this time, smoothing the front of his uniform like appearance could still save substance. Your Honor, Lieutenant Sutter is taking field language out of operational context. We deal with uncertainty. We make fast decisions. We summarize behavior. If every sentence an officer writes gets dissected by people who weren't there, proactive policing becomes impossible. Caprio folded his hands. That is a policy speech. I asked for a response. Mercer's voice sharpened. My response is that I enforce the law. If citizens don't want their cars towed, they should maintain legal registration. Alina looked up at him then, stunned not by anger anymore but by the complete absence of recognition in his face. He still didn't see her. Not really. Caprio asked the question that cut through the abstraction. Officer Mercer, do you believe you treated Mrs. Rios with dignity that night? The answer should have been easy. It was. Mercer hesitated long enough for everyone to notice. I treated her according to procedure. Caprio's eyes darkened. That was not my question. Still Mercer could not say it, not yet. I did my job. The judge leaned forward. Experience without conscience is just practiced cruelty. There it was, another line the city would repeat before sunset. And still, somehow, the day had one more turn to make. Before the next reveal lands, drop a comment telling us whether Mercer deserves the benefit of the doubt anymore. Subscribe if you believe the hardest thing for a proud person to do is answer a simple moral question. Because Caprio then ordered one last piece of evidence, and it stripped away the final excuse Mercer had left. Joanne loaded an audio enhancement of the final minute before the tow departed. The courtroom speakers crackled once, then cleared. This was the same body cam, but the court technician had isolated low-volume pickup while Mercer sat inside the cruiser for a moment out of the rain. The image was dark. The audio was everything. Noah's voice, "We should let her get the bag." Mercer's answer came flat, tired, and devastating. "She'll learn." Noah again, "It's for a kid." Mercer, "Sick kid or not, they all learn." No one moved. Not a whisper, not a cough, not a chair scrape. Even the rain outside seemed to stop. Mercer stared at the screen. For the first time that day, the expression on his face was not anger. It was recognition, not of the evidence, of himself, of the distance between the man he once imagined becoming and the man whose own recorded voice could make a courtroom recoil. His mouth opened, nothing came out. Caprio did not pile on. He didn't need to. The truth was doing it better. "Officer," the judge said softly, "did you say those words?" Mercer's lips trembled once before he pressed them tight. His voice, when it came, was smaller. "Yes." It hit the room like a confession, and a collapse in one. Marisol cried openly now. Alina did not. She just sat very still, the way people do when pain becomes too large for visible motion. Noah lowered his head. Sergeant Benson looked down at his shoes as if he had aged 5 years in a minute. Caprio asked the next question, "Why?" Mercer took a breath that shook on the way in. Because if you start bending rules every time someone cries, the street owns you." He heard himself saying it and seemed to hear, maybe for the first time, how brittle it sounded. "That's what I believed." Caprio nodded. "Believed." Mercer looked at Alina, really looked at her, the cardigan, the tissue, the manila envelope worn soft at the folds, the face of a woman who had buried a husband and still spent her nights making sure a child could breathe. "Yes," he said, "believed." That would have been enough for many courtrooms. Admission, referral, end of hearing. But life is stranger than neat endings, and justice, when it is human, can turn in directions punishment alone never sees. Alina raised her hand. Caprio looked surprised but nodded. "Mrs. Rios." She stood slowly. Marisol tried to help her and she gently shook her head. She wanted to do this on her own. Her voice was fragile, but every ear in the room strained toward it. "Your Honor, may I say something?" "You may." She turned not to the judge, but to Mercer. "When my husband Raphael was alive, he fixed buses for the transit authority. 37 years. He came home smelling like oil and winter air. He used to tell our grandson that a machine breaks faster when one part forgets what it's connected to." She pressed one hand to her chest. "That night, Officer Mercer, you looked at papers and forgot people were attached to them." Mercer said nothing. He couldn't. Alina went on. "I was angry. I am angry. Mateo was frightened. I was humiliated in the street like I was something to manage instead of someone to hear. But I don't want you destroyed because I was hurt." Every person in the courtroom leaned forward. She took a folded letter from the envelope. "Mateo wrote this yesterday. He wanted to come, but Marisol said school first." A sad little smile flashed and disappeared. "He asked me to read one part." Her hand trembled as she opened it. "Dear Judge, I don't hate the policeman. I was mad because I couldn't breathe good and my grandma was crying. But if he is in trouble, I want him to know I'm okay now. Maybe if he sees my machine, he won't do that to another kid." The silence after that was unbearable. Mercer put a hand over his mouth. Elena lowered the letter. "So no, Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want truth. I want him to remember our names." It was the unexpected mercy moment nobody had seen coming. Not because the harm had become smaller, because Elena refused to let harm dictate the size of her humanity. If Elena's words just hit you in the chest, hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling us whether forgiveness should matter in a case like this. Because Mercer was about to do the one thing pride had denied him all day, and even then, justice wasn't done turning the knife. Mercer stood again. There was no swagger left now, no sharpened chin, no performance voice. He looked suddenly what he actually was beneath the uniform, tired, frightened, and terribly late to the truth. "Mrs. Rios," he said, and stopped because his throat closed. He tried again. "Elena, I was wrong." The room listened harder. "I kept telling myself wrong is when you break policy, or miss a code section, or forget a report line. But I was wrong long before that. I was wrong in the way I looked at you. I was wrong in the way I talked to you. I was wrong when I heard there might be an error and kept going because my pride was already moving faster than my judgment." Tears stood in his eyes. He didn't wipe them. "I made your pain into an inconvenience to my authority." He looked at the bench. "And I taught a younger officer that fear was a valid policing tool. That might be the worst part." He swallowed hard. "I can't defend it." No one in the room seemed prepared for how plain and unprotected those words were. This wasn't the polished remorse of a man angling for leniency. It sounded rawer than that, almost frightened, like he had finally stepped out from behind the weaponized language he'd hidden inside for years. Caprio watched him with the same steady expression he'd worn all day. Mercy never made him naive. He knew confession can be sincere and still incomplete. He proved it with his next question. "Officer Mercer, are you saying this was a singular lapse?" Mercer hesitated. Sutter opened the binder wider. "Your Honor, if I may." Caprio nodded. Sutter stood. At 2:42 p.m., our review located a separate dash audio excerpt from a March 3, 2025 stop involving a delivery driver named Thomas Wade. Officer Mercer is heard describing the driver as mouthy and instructing another officer to write argumentative if he keeps asking questions. The audio reflects no raised voice from Mr. Wade. There it was. But wait, there's more twist. And it hit harder because it arrived just as the room wanted to believe Mercer's apology could end the story cleanly. A collective exhale rolled through the gallery. Tasha Green wrote 3 words on her pad in block letters. Pattern confirmed again. Mercer looked like he had been punched in the sternum. "I forgot about that stop." Sutter answered, "That is part of the problem." Caprio's voice was grave now. "Officer, your remorse may be genuine. It does not erase repetition." Mercer nodded once. "I know." "Do you hear that? That's the sound of a case getting bigger than one apology, like this video. If you believe accountability starts where excuses end. Because the next hour didn't just decide a citation. It decided whether a badge could survive the man wearing it. Caprio invited brief statements before ruling. Lena Hart rose first. "Your Honor, the city moves to dismiss all citations against Mrs. Rios with prejudice. We also request reimbursement of tow and storage fees and referral of the matter for independent review regarding report integrity, misuse of discretion, and deprivation of access to medically necessary property." Caprio nodded. "Noted." Sergeant Benson stood next, surprising Mercer. "Your Honor, I've known Officer Mercer 13 years. He was once among our strongest officers. That does not excuse today. If anything, it makes it worse. We trusted him to model judgment. He modeled contempt." Mercer shut his eyes. Benson continued, voice rougher now. "I ask the court to recognize the seriousness of what happened And I ask my department to stop pretending language on reports is harmless when everybody inside knows how those phrases shape outcomes. It was one of the bravest things said all day, because it reached beyond Mercer and pointed at the system that had let him sharpen into this. Then Marisol stood. She was not a lawyer. She was a daughter who had watched her mother sit on a bus bench in the rain and then race a wheezing child back to an ER. Her words were simple, and that made them unforgettable. "My mother obeys crossing lights even when no cars are coming," she said. "She keeps every receipt in labeled envelopes. She still sends birthday cards with cash folded in tissue paper. You made her feel like a criminal for being overwhelmed. If public safety means making decent people afraid to ask for basic mercy, then something is broken deeper than this case." Another shareable quote, another truth too sharp to avoid. Caprio finally turned to Mercer one last time. "Do you have anything further?" Mercer's face was wet now, but he no longer seemed embarrassed by it. "Only this, Your Honor. A badge was the easiest part of who I was. I'm starting to understand the harder part was supposed to be the man under it." Caprio held his gaze for a long moment. Then he ruled. "Mrs. Rios, all citations are dismissed with prejudice. The city is ordered to reimburse tow and storage charges within 14 days. Certified copies of today's record shall be transmitted to Internal Affairs, the city solicitor, and the Rhode Island Police Officer Standards and Training Review Authority for whatever action they deem appropriate." He paused. Every person in the room seemed to stop breathing again. "As to Officer Mercer," Caprio said, "this court is not a decertification board, and I will not pretend authority I do not possess. But I can say this plainly for the public record. A badge is authority borrowed from public trust. The minute pride starts spending it like cash, the account is empty." No one moved. Caprio continued, voice calm and immense. "Mercy is not the opposite of justice. It is what keeps justice human. Mrs. Rios has shown mercy today. The law now owes her justice." He looked directly at Mercer. "You may yet become a better man, but this record raises grave doubt as to whether you should remain an officer." That was it, not dramatic, not theatrical, devastating because it was precise. Mercer stood there, while the words settled over him like the end of a storm and the start of winter. Then, in a gesture no one had asked for, he reached up with both hands and unclipped badge 4172 from his chest. The tiny metal sound it made coming free was almost nothing, but in that room it sounded like a crack. He didn't throw it, didn't slam it, didn't make a speech. He just looked at it in his palm for a moment like he had never seen it clearly before, then set it on counsel table in front of Sergeant Benson. People would say later that this was the moment his badge died, not because metal broke, but because the myth inside it did. Before we jump ahead, comment this. Should Mercer have resigned on the spot, or should the system force the decision? Because what happened after that hearing moved faster than anyone expected, and the whole city started watching. By evening, clips from Courtroom 2B were everywhere. Tasha Green's segment ran at 6:04 p.m. with the line, "A Providence officer's courtroom clash over discretion has triggered an internal integrity review after body camera evidence contradicted his report." Social media stripped it down even further. One clip showed Mercer saying, "The law does not contain an exception for sympathy." Another showed Caprio replying, "You can enforce the law without humiliating the people it binds." Millions would watch some version of it over the next week, most talked about, most forwarded, most argued over. Some defended Mercer at first. They said cops make hard calls. They said armchair morality is cheap. They said judges live in safe rooms and officers live in uncertainty. Then the enhanced audio clip spread. "Sick kid or not, they all learn." That sentence ended most of the argument. Providence police placed Mercer on administrative leave before midnight. At 11, 42 p.m., he sat alone at his kitchen table on Admiral Street with the badge still in an evidence envelope Benson had insisted he take home before formal surrender. The apartment smelled faintly of starch and cold coffee. Sports radio was off. The silence felt deserved. He set the badge on the table beside a framed photo of Zoe at age 6 wearing a paper crown from Greg's restaurant, smiling.